Everyone's favorite George has been answering questions on his Fire and Blood post, and most of it is depressing, for multiple reasons. Okay, so most of you know about George's adorable blog entry talking about how The Winds of Winter won't be published in 2018, but Fire and Blood, an almost 1,000-page Targaryen history book, will be out later this year. And he seemed so excited about it, which of course meant the spoiled brats of the internet had to ruin it for him and everyone else. First, and not surprisingly, George's publishers are telling him to break up Winds of Winter into 2 books like he did for Feast and Dance. But George says he's resisting that notion. I think splitting the book in 2 would be cool, but I know others aren't as keen on it. Still, something would be nice, but I respect George's process and his decision with his series. George also admitted he has done rewriting for The Winds of Winter, but there have been distractions as well, causing his writing to slow down. He claimed he has not started working on Dream of Spring, though. Which I pray to the old gods anew will stop all these fucking idiots who say that he's finished all the books and he's just withholding them for whatever fucking stupid reason they give. Holy heck, I was so excited about this next part. When asked about the possibility of George releasing the deleted Tyrion chapter in Dance where he met the Shrouded Lord, George said he will need to do something with that chapter one of these days, but he just doesn't know what yet. I'm excited for any form we get it in. Also, I'd love to hear everyone else's Shrouded Lord theories. This next part gets depressing fast, so I guess hold on to your butts. So after some lady named Mel told George he was stupid and unearned and saying Fire and Blood was similar to the Silmarillion, and that his shit wasn't finished yet, and nobody would have cared about Tolkien if he hadn't finished Lord of the Rings. And I just want to throw this out here, he has jokingly called it his George R.R. Marillion for some time now. You know, as a joke. As a joke he said he was making, so go fuck yourself, Mel, you fucking entitled bitch. Anyways, George just slapped some sense into her in the most delightful way ever. He asked her, "You are aware that Tolkien never finished the Silmarillion, I trust?" The book published under that title in the 70s was compiled by his son Christopher and Guy Gavriel Kay. I love the Silmarillion for what it's worth, almost as much as Lord of the Rings itself. He then continued to destroy her delicate soul by saying, "Understood, Mel, but here's the thing. You call Lord of the Rings the main story, but if you had asked Tolkien, he would have said the Silmarillion was his main story, his life's work. Yet he was never able to complete it during his lifetime. Not because he did not care, however. Tolkien was an Oxford Don and may actually have considered his teaching to be his life's work, rather than his writing. Just for the sake of argument, let me point out that many people invest their time into works without endings. I do intend to finish A Song of Ice and Fire, of course, but doubtless Peake, Dickens, Fitzgerald, and Tolkien would have said the same." You got fucking roasted, Mel. So yeah, Mel's a bitch. But what's scarier is what George is sort of implying. He says that he fully intends on finishing the A Song of Ice and Fire series, but he also acknowledges those other authors also meant to finish their own works. Never have words haunted me so much. But if he doesn't, he doesn't. George needs to live out his life the way he wants to with the money he's earned. But at least he's realistic in thinking, hey, there's a possibility that I may never finish this series. Next, it doesn't look like George will be putting out any more sample chapters for The Winds of Winter, and he already feels like he put out too many in the first place. Writing? I think I have probably released too many sample chapters already. Put them all together and what? There are probably more than 100 pages? I honestly don't know. I've never tried the exercise. In the past, I've always been happy to release sample chapters and to read other chapters at cons. But in this age of the internet, no good deed goes unpunished. That was brought home to me when the anthology Book of Swords was released, and I found myself reading reviews that slammed Sons of the Dragon as old, retread material because I've read the story at a couple cons, for the entertainment of the few hundred people in the audience. But of course, summaries went up all over the web, and somehow in the minds of some, what should have been a brand new reading experience became old and familiar. It's not worth it putting up sample chapters and giving readings if it means it will come back and bite me in the ass when the book is finally published. Also, he said he won't be releasing chapters that he just read at cons, where the summaries are already on the internet. He said that will just make it worse, which, poor guy, you can tell that he's been beat up a lot about this, and it really weighs on him. He said a little bit more, writing, "Look, there's always an immediate positive feedback when you read a new chapter at a con or post a new sample online. But these days, the internet is so omnipresent that I am not sure these sort of things don't do more harm than good." He added on a little bit to that, saying, "I take both good reviews and bad in stride. I've been doing this since 1971, so I have long since become accustomed to the fact that some readers will not like a particular book or story. But reading that the never-before-published Sons of the Dragon was old recycled material did irritate me. Yes, the section was old in that it was originally written for the World Book, but since it had never before been published, it should have been perceived as brand new material. In essence, by reading it at a con, I had spoiled my own twists." George was a bit shocked to hear that his last Dunk and Egg story was 8 years ago, which also shocked me and made me realize time is a dirty bitch. But speaking of Dunk and Egg, George said he will certainly do more Dunk and Egg at some point, but he has to figure out how to fit it in his schedule. On that note, and also sad, George said the Winterfell Dunk and Egg book isn't in any form yet. He also responded to someone letting him know that we don't need any spin-offs or extra history books or any of those money makers, saying, "I am not sure HBO would agree that the spin-offs, I prefer the term successor shows myself, could have waited. With GOT set to end in 2019, they put 5 of them in the works, so as to have a new show, or more than one, to take up the mantle in 2020. Development takes time. The successor shows were going to happen regardless. I prefer that they happen with my participation and guidance, rather than without." I guess spoilers for that super selfish person, George has every right to publish a million money makers, just like you have every right to not purchase them. I mean, have you noticed a lot of things George used to do for us fans he no longer does because of the minority that have just freaked the fuck out on him? It's absolutely disgusting. But, you know, the few have always ruined it for the many. Ooh, and after I said that, I read George responded to someone basically saying what I had said. Bill Kraft said, "We want to know about Jon Snow, not Targaryen history." George responded, "Lots of people want Targaryen history. And Dunk and Egg stories. You don't happen to be one of them? I get it. But you don't speak for everyone. Far from it." Which, on that topic, Andy had a really nice message to George that hits the nail on the head with how disturbing it is to see George getting yelled at about an announcement he made for something he worked hard on and wants to put out in the world. George responded with his process of writing despite those voices, saying, "Shutting out is hitting the nail right on the head. When my work is going well, and no, it does not always go well, there are times of trouble. Nothing exists for me but the scene I am writing. Publishers, editors, deadlines, readers, fans, none of that matters in the least. All of that is gone. Only the characters exist." Sometimes this is difficult to explain to readers, and even to other writers, whose approach and temperaments are different. But it has always been the way I've worked. When the real world intrudes, well, that's it. One has to do what one can so the real world does not intrude. Which kind of goes into why he doesn't do announcements anymore, on why he doesn't give us updates on his progress. He said, "My past experience has proved to me that progress reports do more harm than good. Some people dislike the answer, and that triggers a fresh wave of nonsense. Or they do like the answer, but having answered one question just guarantees I will get 100 more the next day. Also, since no one ever seems to go back to old posts, I get the same questions over and over and over again, even if I've already answered them a dozen times. Sadly, that just seems to be just what is happening here on this new blog. Replying to comments just brings in more comments that people want replies to, and the commenters will not stay on topic, no matter how often I ask. This post, for example, was about Fire and Blood, but I'm getting tons of comments about Winds of Winter and the Game of Thrones series, including some very specific questions about specific characters. Questions of the sort that I have never replied to, and will never reply to. Character reveals belong in books, not blogs. I do like to engage with my readers, but this does get frustrating. Lastly, here are some fun tidbits by George. He talked about Targaryens becoming dragon riders, saying, "As to when and how various Targaryens have become dragon riders, well, it varies. I think that it is realistic based on what I have seen and learned from my real-world friends who ride horses. Some begin to ride when they are very young, some as teenagers, some not until adulthood. There are even cases of riders who don't get on a horse until retirement. Horses vary, people vary, and so do dragons and their riders." He also clarified that we won't learn where Dany got her eggs in the Fire and Blood book, which there was a little sentence about that, but it got taken out. And he also mentioned how there's no definitive answers to Valeria and dragon eggs, that there are all just possible answers. He confirmed Robb loved Jon more than Theon, which I feel like we all knew, but it's nice to have confirmation. On fan theories, he stated, "I am not really familiar with most crazy fan theories. Well, at least not the new ones. I stopped looking at fan boards many years ago. There are too many of them, and while I love the enthusiasms, I did not want to take the chance that any of it could influence the work." He talked about certain scenes he's had in mind for decades, writing, "Yes, I had certain reveals and twists and scenes in my mind all the way back to the early 90s, and none of those have changed. However, in the process of writing, new ideas are always coming to me. That's one of the things that separates the gardener from the architect." Oh, also he said Little Mermaid was way better than Beauty and the Beast, so suck it. So that's your George update. It's okay to be disappointed, I am, but George is going to do what George is going to do, and there's so many other awesome things out there to fill in the time. Also, Fire and Blood is going to be fucking awesome. I'm sorry for the Targaryen haters. You guys have really been getting screwed.